Hello, everyone. We are going to start now. So my name is Chrissy O'Grady, and I am the session moderator. Welcome to the session, Sowing Good Seeds, Outreach Strategies for Liaisons, presented by Hilary Wong. Hilary Wong is an Instructional Services Librarian and liaison to geology, biology, physics, and chemistry at SUNY Cortland. She previously worked in interlibrary loan at Wells College and Ithaca College, and as reference coordinator at Cornell's Division of Rare and Manuscript Collections. So Hilary earned an MS-LIS from Syracuse University and an MA from Cornell University. So before Hilary starts her presentation, I just need to go over a few things. First, that the session is being recorded. Second, that please remain muted unless invited to speak. Third, please put your questions and comments in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring it. And lastly, if you have any technical issues or questions, feel free to private message me and we can figure something out. All right, Hilary, take it away when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chrissy. Also, wait a minute, is this actually working? There we go. I also wanted to let everybody know we're going to share the slides at the end of this. So don't worry if you miss anything, because you'll get to see the slides. So I'm talking today about some strategies that I have found useful as a liaison in a sort of strange new world for me, kind of in multiple different contexts and in different ways. My experience as a liaison to the sciences has been an interesting one, and these are some strategies that have been effective for me that I'm going to share, and I'm also hoping to hear what works for you and at your institutions. Because there's quite a wide breadth and depth of libraries associated with SUNY, so I'm curious to hear what's working other places. So first of all, some background and some context. So my master's is actually in history, and so my academic background is not in the sciences. It's in history, and I worked in special collections for many years. And then in November of 2018, I shifted over to working at SUNY Cortland, and where I became liaison to several different disciplines in the sciences. And this was a big change for me in a lot of different ways. I was new to the institution. I'd never worked at SUNY Cortland before. I had never been a liaison before. I'd never worked with my departments before, with these disciplines before, and I have zero academic background in the sciences. My academic background in the sciences consists of maybe 2 or 3 science classes that I took as an undergrad. And I was also new to a role where I was going to have more extensive teaching and outreach as part of my job. I came to a place that has a really robust and healthy information literacy program, but where my departments, there was a lot of room for growth. The library over the years had made many overtures to faculty in my disciplines, but they hadn't really been responsive for whatever reason. And certainly when I started, that was the case. I tried really hard my first semester to get anybody to let me into a class, right? Into classes to teach. And I managed to get one faculty member to let me into one class. And that was it, my first full semester. But the nice thing about a place where there's room for growth is you get to do the growing, right? You get to be the gardener, right? Plant the seeds, try to see what happens. And this last semester, this last semester, I did 13 sessions. So from 1 to 13. So, growing something is definitely possible. So here are some sort of outlook and big picture mental stuff that I tell myself that has been useful for me in addressing this. So librarians are great at looking stuff up, right? We love to do research, part of why we're librarians, right? And certainly that has served me very well because I've had to do a lot of reading, right? I've had to do a lot of research and reading up to try to get good at this. And it's actually been fun, right? It's if you've been in any kind of a rut with what you were doing before, getting the chance to learn something new is really kind of fun and a nice way to indulge curiosity, right? I found it very necessary to laugh when I mess up, because I inevitably do, right? My favorite story with this is when I first met a faculty member in astronomy who, he and I have worked together a lot since then. But when I first met him and he was inviting me into his astronomy class, we were talking about the schedule and the different sections. And I said, oh, so are some of the sections lecture and some of them discussion sections? And without missing a beat, he said, no, they're actually labs. So I was like, oh, okay, all right. So, learn from your mistakes and try not to make too much of them. A way that I've found helpful for thinking about outreach is like Imperial probe droids from the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. I don't know if you remember the very beginning when there's this big Star Destroyer and they're sending out these Imperial probe droids in all different directions, and they're kind of zooming off, right? Looking for the rebels, trying to figure out where the rebels are. And they're sending them everywhere because they don't know, right? They don't know which ones are going to bring back useful information. They don't know which ones are going to be helpful to them. So they send them out in all different directions and see what lands and what gives them some good information. And that's kind of how I think about outreach, right? Is I don't know what of what I'm going to try. I don't know if it's going to be useful or not. I don't know what's going to be helpful. I don't know reaching out to whom is going to be helpful. I don't know until I try, right? And also with outreach, I don't know if what I try now is not going to work, but may lay the groundwork for something later. You just don't know, but it's kind of a nice outlook I found to think about it, like just trying things, seeing what works. And I would say that if you are new to being a liaison in a specific discipline, or new to specifically a discipline which isn't your own, right, where you don't have academic background, I can see how imposter syndrome would be a thing, could be a really big thing. And so here's what I have told myself that has kept me from falling into that too much. I'm not a scientist, right? But I wasn't hired to be a scientist. I was hired to be a librarian, right? I should mention, I don't rub my faculty's faces in the fact that I know nothing about their disciplines, right? If someone directly asked me what my academic background was, I would tell them, but I don't bring it up. But at the same time, I was hired to be a librarian. And when I teach information literacy skills well, when I do my job well, everybody wins. The students win because their papers are better, right? My faculty wins because they have to read less stuff that, isn't as good, right? And everybody's happy. So when I teach librarian things and do librarian things, good things happen for these students in the sciences, even without me having the academic background there. So that's at least what I tell myself. So practical strategies, ask a librarian. So one of the things that I like about our profession is we tend to be a bunch of helpers. We like to help other people, and that includes each other, right? So people tend to be very generous with their knowledge and their experience and with what works and what doesn't. And a lot of the practical strategies that I'm about to talk about here came directly from other librarians at SUNY Cortland, because I asked and they told me and they helped me and they were right? So special shout out here to my boss, Lauren DeLaBelle, and to my mentor, Rick Powell, and to my colleague, Lisa Shear, whose brains I've collectively probably picked the most on this stuff. But I asked them, okay, so what works here? What works in reaching out to your faculty? Or say you're taking over from somebody with your disciplines. You can say, okay, so what works with this department? Another thing that's been useful is library instruction meetings. We meet twice a month. The librarians, the Instructional Services Librarians meet to talk about what works and what doesn't and bounce ideas off of each other. It's a great way to get feedback and ideas. But maybe you're at a smaller institution where you don't have that many people you can ask, right? If that's the case, hit up your network. So if you have mentors from other institutions or librarians you know from elsewhere who are liaisons to similar departments, pick their brains. I have over the years picked the brains of a couple of science librarians that I know from places I used to work. Or, you know, maybe you just graduated from library school, right? You could actually ask the librarians who are the liaisons from the school where you went to library school, or even your undergrad. You know, I'm sure they would be happy to help. But, you know, ask and you shall receive. Check the course schedule. So this is a really smart move when the semester is coming and new semester is coming. And so I go into Banner and I look to see in my disciplines who is teaching the writing intensives. What are the writing intensive courses for the semester? Are there any classes that, you know, sound like they have a heavy library research component? You know, for the sciences, that usually includes the phrase researching the literature. And then I email those faculty directly and say, hi, I see you're teaching such and such, and it's a writing intensive. Are you interested in having me come into your class and teach? And at the beginning, there was a lot of introducing myself too, saying, well, hi, I'm the new library liaison to your department, and this is how I can help you. And then if the faculty are interested, I ask for, you know, the syllabus and the assignment and what kind of help their students are most going to need as I try to structure my teaching. If you do this, expect a lot of confusion about what it is that you do. And this isn't just the case when, you know, maybe you're new in your position. Anytime I'm working with a faculty member who hasn't worked with me before or hasn't worked with another librarian before, there's a level of confusion about what exactly it is that I do and what library instruction looks like and what that means and how it can help them. So just be prepared that people, like there's a faculty member whom I taught for the first time this year who was like, oh gosh, I don't know, is it okay for you to come into 3 different sections of my class to do this? I don't want to ask you to do. I was like, do that all the time. Yes, of course, that's totally fine. But, you know, he didn't know that. So just be prepared for some confusion. The nice thing is the more you do this, the more your faculty will tell their friends, right? The word will spread, and then people will be more receptive when you reach out to them. Contact your departments through mass emails. So these you want to use sparingly. It's important, right? But you don't want to be in everybody's faces all the time so that they start to tune you out. So usually when I first started, I sent an email as an introduction to my department saying, hi, I'm the new library liaison, and here's some things I can help you with. And since then, I generally send library updates once a semester, just sort of telling them what's new and what's, you know, new, especially that's relevant to them. And then if during the semester something comes up, like we get a new database, or, you know, like when the thing happened with Science Direct, right? Then I emailed the whole departments. And to do that, it's usually prudent to go through the department secretaries because they have all the emails for everybody and they can just send it out, forward your email as an email to your departments. Another way to do this is going into department meetings. And so I would email the chair of the department, copy the secretary, and ask if I could come in for a few minutes to a department meeting. And usually, you know, I would explain a little bit about what I do, but it sometimes helps if there's something specific that I would want to talk to my faculty about. For instance, there was one time when we were reviewing journals, and there were some journal subscriptions that we were doing individually for biology that were not getting much faculty use. And did the faculty actually want them? Going into the department meeting, it was a great chance to ask them that and get some instant feedback. Or when we got Alma and Primo, it was really nice to go in and do a quick little demo and be like, here, this is what we have. So that's another way you can reach out to people. Targeting new faculty. I like this one because new faculty, they're open to ideas. They're new. They haven't been working here for 30 years. And it isn't that someone who's been working somewhere for 30 years might not be open to working with a librarian if they haven't before. But new faculty tend to be more open. And there are a couple of different ways to do this. Usually at SUNY Cortland, we get a list at the beginning of each academic year with new faculty in each department. And then you can just look those people up and email them and say, oh, welcome, I'm your library liaison. Here's what I can do for you. And then we also have new faculty orientation. So the librarians get to come to a small part of new faculty orientation and introduce themselves in person to the new faculty and their disciplines. So that's a really nice way of catching people. But if neither of those are an option for you, you might just check the department websites, right? Because and see if there's anybody who's on there who wasn't listed before. That could be another way of getting at the same thing. Presence. So attending events and presentations by your faculty or their students is really great. And like on a very basic level, you know, it reminds people that you exist, right? But more importantly than that, it shows them that you care about them. You care about them and their students and what's interesting to them. It shows that you're engaged and makes them, it sort of breeds goodwill, right? And also it's just useful. I've learned some really interesting, helpful things about my departments by attending this sort of thing, right? Like what are the research interests? What are they focusing on? What's important to them? And that can help me sometimes with my teaching, but it also gives me new ideas for avenues for outreach. And I mean, there's nothing bad that can come out of understanding your departments better, right? In normal times, physical presence is something I go for, right? I would go to presentations in person or whatever. Also, I generally park behind the science building, which isn't that much further away, but it gives me a chance. I'm cutting through the science building every morning and bumping into people and saying hi, just reminding them that I'm there, right? And that I find very useful. Okay, so some of what makes this hard. For me personally, the social stuff is the hardest, especially at the beginning, because when I first started, I spent a lot of time feeling like a stalker and also just being acutely aware of my social awkwardness. So I am an extroverted introvert. I've heard the phrase ambivert before. That's where I am. So it's hard putting myself out there, right? And hard putting myself out there when I don't know people. And, you know, so what I've just described involves a lot of emailing people you don't know and like almost giving them a sales pitch, right? And it's even worse, or even harder, I should say, in person when you don't know people. You know, each semester we have the president's opening meeting that the faculty go to and the librarians are there. And, you know, it's a really great opportunity to introduce yourself to your faculty. And it's really, really awkward and really hard when you don't know people. I can remember an early meeting where I sat there the whole time trying to sort of work up the courage to go introduce myself to the new chair of the biology department. It's a lot easier if your librarian friends can introduce you. If there are people who know any of your faculty and they can introduce you, it makes it much, much easier. And, you know, with time, it just gets easier anyway. You know, I don't know when we'll next have a president's opening meeting that's in person, but by the time we do, I'll just be greeting people whom I already know, right? I'll be saying hi to the faculty I've already worked with, and they can introduce me to their friends, right? A similar related issue that kind of comes up over and over again for me is trying to find balance, because I want people to know that I exist. I want people to know that I can help them, right? But I don't want to be too needy. I don't want to be too too assertive and too much in their faces, right? And figuring out where the line is sort of an ongoing challenge. Other challenges. So this is a really big picture one. So understanding how your disciplines approach problems and ask questions. So this isn't relevant if it's something that you already know something about, right? But for me, with no academic background in the sciences, I've had to ask a lot of questions about how my students should be thinking when they're doing library research. You know, what is a good question that they should be asking? How should they be approaching researching the literature? What does it mean in the context of the actual kind of papers that they're writing? You know, one example is lab reports. So the first time I was teaching a class where there were lab reports and they needed to research the literature for lab reports, I was like, wait a minute. What do they actually do with the literature and the lab reports? Is that supposed to inform their hypothesis? Is that supposed to inform how they interpret their results? What is the good use of the literature? Like, what is a good use of the literature when they're researching it, right? How should they be thinking as they approach the literature? And I didn't know, so I had to do a bunch of reading to try to get kind of a sense of that. To help me teach them better. And it's important. It's an important thing. It's also really time consuming. If you are like me and you wind up without much teaching to do early on, that gives you more time. That gives you more time to try to figure this stuff out. But it takes time. And related to that, another kind of challenge that I have is to know when to ask questions of my faculty. I don't mean logistical questions. I mean sort of bigger picture questions that would help me with my teaching. I try as much as possible to read, like say about lab reports, right? To read as much as possible, inform myself as much as possible, and then ask specific questions about the context, right? The specific context of the class. And usually the time to do that is when I feel like I am trying really hard to be a psychic. If I'm trying too hard to read the faculty members' minds, that's when it's a good time to ask them questions. So examples of what this looks like. So I help out in a biochemistry class where she asked me to teach evaluation, but it's evaluation of sources, not in the sort of like crap method way, right? But more, she wants them to teach, or she wants them to present on an article that is about biochemistry, that isn't too much about biology and isn't too much about chemistry, but hits the sweet spot of being about biochemistry. Now, with no academic background in any of this stuff, I was like, okay, sure, I'll figure that out. I can do that. Sure, I can. But she gave really good criteria. She gave really good and clear criteria. So I spent a lot of time trying to apply that criteria, looking for articles, figuring out, okay, so how would you get at this? What subject headings could you use? That sort of thing. But as I did so, I realized, I need some clarification, because is this kind of thing okay? Or is it not? Is this too borderline? So I ended up asking her, and she said, oh, that's a really great question. And she ended up clarifying and changing her criteria to be more specific because of the questions that I asked. So that was useful and helpful. Another example is a member of the physics faculty said, do you teach how to ask good questions? And I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because, it's part of our framework, right? It's part of the ACRL framework. And I love to teach how to ask good questions, because it's challenging and it's fun and it's interesting. And students don't often get asked to think about it. So yes, I absolutely do. But the context was this physics lab class where he gives them a tremendous amount of freedom to design their own experiments. He says, here's this piece of equipment. What do you want to test with it? What do you want to do? Go do that lab. Go make up your own lab and go do it. So he wanted me to help them with some techniques for brainstorming what they could do with these physics labs. Now, mind you, I didn't even take physics in high school. So I spent a lot of time reading about, okay, what do you do in a physics lab? What kind of things could you test? What what would you do? And then once I had that background, I approached him and said, okay, could you give me an example of a piece of equipment and what kind of experiments students did? Or is there, is there a lab that you guys are going to do, or a piece of equipment you were going to offer them that that we could workshop, that we could do? And it ended up working out really well. I felt like it went well, and the feedback from both the physics faculty member and the students was really positive. So I think in both cases, I waited till the right moment to ask questions, but it's a tricky one, because again, you don't want to be too needy. All right, we've reached the Be an Opportunist section of this talk. Lord Peter Baelish wants you to be an opportunist, an outreach opportunist. The reason why this is here is this came out of a joke from early in the pandemic. I was talking to my boss about the weird opportunities that were coming up for outreach because of COVID. And I jokingly said, well, chaos is a ladder, ha, ha, ha. And she was teasing me that I should include that in this presentation. So I did. So there you go. Okay, so be an opportunist. So COVID provided some interesting opportunities for outreach, right? So in this Be an Opportunist section, I'm mostly going to talk about using whatever you've got as potential outreach to your faculty, whatever you think might be relevant or interesting to them. But COVID's kind of its own case, right? So some interesting things that happened with outreach because of COVID. I became embedded in several classes, and I had dabbled in that a little bit, but hadn't done it much before. To me, when I hear embedded, I think of TICs rather than librarians, and certainly wasn't used to doing it myself. But it proved to be this great thing during COVID because it allowed me to reach out to students really directly and be right there where they were to help them. So case in point, the astronomy class that I teach in, they do a history of science class and they use a lot of books. And all of a sudden, the library was completely shut down. Everybody was sent home after spring break and couldn't come back. Nobody could go to their local public library or other SUNY to pick up books. They couldn't get the ILL books that they had ordered that were sitting here on the shelf. They couldn't get them. And we all of a sudden had all of these ebook repositories that were suddenly, collections that were suddenly available to us temporarily. But I don't know how many of them were there, like 7 of them? Like there were a lot of them. And each of them had to be navigated differently and on its own. And the students were just bewildered and overwhelmed. And I was able, the prof added me on Teams. He was like, here, I'll put you on Teams. I'll put you in our team. And I was able to talk to the students directly and say, here's some stuff that's working. Here, I made a LibGuide to show you guys what to do. Here's some stuff that I'm finding that's helpful. Write to me, I'll help you. And several of them chatted with me within Teams. Some of them emailed me, and I was able to help the students get through it. And I was right there with them. It was also, being embedded has also been really useful to remind students that I'm here and available to help when they get close to the due dates for their assignments, because usually faculty members have me come in near the beginning of the semester when they're supposed to be beginning working, but we all know students and we all know they wait till the last minute, at which point it's helpful to say, remember me, I can help you, and not having to ask the faculty to email the students for you is really nice. Another opportunity that came out of COVID, we use the Digital Commons repository, and the Transformations Undergraduate Research Conference is our annual student research conference where the students present on research that they've done. And I'm on both our Digital Commons team and the Transformations Committee for the college. And we had already been talking to everybody about the idea of putting student posters up in Digital Commons, right, to preserve them there and share them with everybody. So that was already kind of in the works. And then COVID happened. And after a while, it became clear that we were not going to be doing this conference in person. And so Digital Commons became the means of doing the Transformations Conference, right? Anybody who still wanted to participate could send their stuff in. And so, and then I put it up there in Digital Commons. So I put the link to that in the chat early on, if you want to check that out. And that was a nice outreach opportunity. That was a nice thing to do for the students, right, who were having such a rough time, that they could still share the good work that they had done, right? And it was nice outreach to my departments, because a lot of their students participate in transformations, and not a lot of their students sent stuff in, but it still was a really nice means of outreach anyway. Asynchronous tutorials is another one. So I ended up doing, because of the needs of my departments, I did a number of asynchronous tutorials in the fall and in the spring for various classes. And that got me one new faculty member whom I hadn't worked with before, who really liked the idea of not taking time out of his class, right? Not giving me class time, but giving them a little assignment to do. That worked really well for him. So those were some COVID opportunities that I was able to take advantage of, I guess. In general, it's about using what you've got. As I said, anything related to their disciplines. And the truth is that once faculty know you, they'll reach out to you with questions, and that can lead to things too. And people are also more open to ideas. So some examples. Back in the fall, I attended a really great OER symposium at Stony Brook, a virtual one, where some of the Stony Brook faculty were talking about how in one of their core biology classes, they had these sort of recurring issues, these recurring problems that students were having. So they wrote their own OER to address that. And they shared the OER with everybody. And their class was Bio 201. I was like, hey, we have a Bio 201. I wonder if this would be useful to them. So I emailed the faculty who teach it. And I said, hey, I just went to this really nice OER symposium and learned about this great thing that these faculty members at Stony Brook did. And I just wanted to share it with you in case it's relevant to your Bio 201 class. And next thing you know, I was getting invited in to teach in that class for the next semester, where I hadn't been able to make inroads before. Collection development is another one, right? You could always get faculty feedback on that. The makerspace is really a work in progress, and I would love to hear from other people who have successfully marketed their makerspace to science faculty. Because what happened with us is we had, like, everyone went to all this trouble. I made this glorious makerspace, and then COVID hit, right? It opened and COVID hit. And so faculty in my departments didn't really have a chance to use it. And in truth, in talking to them, I don't think that they know how they can use it. I don't think that they realize how they can use it in the curriculum. And so I feel like I have a lot of work to do on that front to try to reach out to them. But I'm still learning myself, right? So if anybody has any good suggestions, I would love to hear from you on that. Another special project that came out of being an opportunist. So the biochemistry professor that I mentioned, her biochemistry class also created these bioinfographics that are about enzymes. And it was this big collaborative project with other students over in California. And they made these really beautiful posters and, they made beautiful infographics. And the professor approached me about, well, could we put these up in the library? Could we make a little exhibit in the library? And that was great because this just happened at the end of this last semester. And, the library has always been, this welcoming open space, right, where students come. And with COVID, I know many of my colleagues feel like they've had to be the mask police all the time. And it just hasn't been as warm and welcoming of a space as we would want it to be. So here we are, what could be better than this nice little exhibition of student work right when people come into the library, right? And then I thought, well, hey, what about Digital Commons? Maybe we could share some posters in Digital Commons too. And she knew about Digital Commons, but she didn't know that much about it. And so she and I ended up working together, and we made this really nice, nice display of the students' work. And there's a link to that in the chat as well from the beginning. And so that was great because now she knows about Digital Commons, and she's gone and told her friends. She told me that she talked about it at a chemistry department meeting and showed everybody what we did on Digital Commons. So that's another one. And finally, this one is brand spanking new. This is a toughie. So I am writing a bibliographic essay for choice about books by BIPOC scientists, so scientists of color. And I invited 2 of my faculty members to co-author with me, and they said yes. So this encapsulates, like really sums up everything that's good about outreach for me and everything that's really hard. That's really hard. So first of all, I had to ask my faculty members to co-author something with me. And even though it was Dave, the astro prof, and Catherine, the biochemistry prof, whom I have these really nice working relationships with, it was still really hard for me to be like, hey, you want to co-author something with me? That was really challenging. And then once they said yes, I've got the issue of, oh, wait, now my faculty are involved. This can't crash and burn. This has to come out well. This really has to turn out because I'm taking the lead on it and my faculty are involved. So it really puts the pressure on me to do it right, do it well. I'm also the person taking the lead on it, which is kind of awkward, but there you go. And also there's just the challenge of the project itself, right? Because you know, there's no author of color filter in one search, right? You can't go to WorldCat and check a little box and just get, you know, authors of color. And then there's the problem with you can't make assumptions about how people identify, right? So it's really tricky and labor intensive to work on. But, right, it's also really rewarding because we're doing something that will hopefully help the collections at SUNY Cortland to be more representative, right? And will hopefully help librarians, because I feel like librarians everywhere are struggling with this sort of thing right now, right? It will help other science liaisons to make their collections more representative too. And it's taking really good working relationships and taking them kind of a step further. And who knows what that will lead to, right? So it's both really good and really hard. But I think that kind of is what outreach is for me in general. Really good, really hard, really rewarding. But yeah, and I include at the end here, I've got the links. And Chrissy is going to share the link to the slides. And I think that there's stuff in chat and I haven't even been paying attention to it, but yeah, let's see what we got here. I'm open to questions. Maybe Chrissy, maybe you can help me see what's here.
Yeah, I think it's mostly me with my links, but that was fantastic. A lot of really good ideas. And really excited to hear, hopefully, and see your choice essay. But yeah, if anyone has questions or comments or want to share their ideas, we have until 3:15.
Yeah, so does anybody have questions, or what is useful? What has been useful for people at your institutions for doing outreach? What has been useful? And just feel free to unmute yourself and talk. Does anybody have anything that hasn't worked? I'm going to stop sharing for one thing. Anybody have anything? All right, well, I guess everybody can have a nice early afternoon. The sun's out.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Hilary, for your presentation. Let's see, there's some socials tonight, if anyone is interested in those, and more sessions tomorrow.